So we are reading Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. We are on chapter 4 of the book, Superluminal Connectedness, page number 26 of the book, and page number
36 of the PDF. Superluminal connectedness. Scientists are now finding evidence for a universal immediate connectedness within the framework of science, both mathematically and experimentally. In 1964, physicist J.S. Bell published a mathematical proof called Bell's theorem. Bell's theorem mathematically supports the concept that subatomic particles are connected in some way that transcends space and time, so that anything that happens to one particle affects other particles. This effect is immediate and does not need time to be transmitted.
Okay, so what does this imply, right? Once two particles are connected with each other, they are forever connected. And if something happens to one particle, it will happen to the other particle. They have done these experiments with DNA where they found that if they took a DNA of a person, right, and something happened to the person, it reflected in the DNA. First, they thought that it will be proximity related. So they did the experiment in the same room and the DNA got affected, right? If they stress the man or the person from whom the DNA was taken, the DNA sample also reflected stress. I don't know how they measured it, but they measured. Then they put him in another room, right? And they did the experiment. It still worked. Then they put him in another building within the same campus and it worked. They put him at the other end of the town and it still worked. They put him in another city in the same country and it worked. And then they put him in another country, in another building, and it still worked. And they put him across the world and it still worked, right? So what he's saying over here, according to this theory, anything that is connected once is connected forever. And if something happens to one, it will happen to the other. So both the particles are interrelated and connected, and they keep affecting each other.
Einstein's relativity theory stated that it is impossible for a particle to travel faster than the speed of light. In Bell's theorem, effects can be superluminal or faster than the speed of light. Bell's theorem has now been supported by experimentation. We are now talking about a phenomenon that stands outside Einstein's theory of relativity. We are trying to go beyond the wave-particle duality.
So now what happens, right? Since what is happening, let's say the experiment is being conducted in America, and the person from whom the DNA was taken is in Japan, right? If something happens to the guy in Japan, it immediately affects the DNA in America. Now, there is no way that information from Japan to America can pass through instantaneously, but over here it happens instantaneously. Now, according to the theory of relativity of Einstein, a particle cannot travel faster than the speed of light. So there's a limitation on the speed that a particle can travel at. But here the information gets transmitted immediately. So it is actually going faster than the speed of light, right? So we are transcending the wave particle duality that we read about previously.
So once again, as the state of the art of scientific equipment advances, allowing us to probe deeper into matter with more sensitivity, we find phenomena that cannot be explained by the current theory. When this kind of probing happened in the late 1800s, the discovery of electricity revolutionized the world and made us think even more deeply about who we are. When it happened again in the 1940s, Atomic power revolutionized the world. It appears that we are now headed into another period of tremendous change. If physicists learn how this instantaneous connectedness works, we could conceivably learn to be consciously aware of our instantaneous connections with the world and each other. This would obviously revolutionize communication. It would also drastically change how we interact with each other. This instantaneous connection may provide us with the ability to read each other's minds whenever we want to. We could know what is going on in each other and truly understand each other deeply. We may also see more clearly how our thoughts, feelings, energy fields, and actions affect the world much more than we previously thought.
So what does this imply, right? That today, if we could communicate instantaneously and we could have the ability to read whatever was being transmitted or the thoughts of another person, right? Now, how does that happen? Whenever we are thinking, energy is getting radiated from the brain, and if someone can perceive it, they can actually catch whatever has been transmitted from the brain. So if we could communicate instantaneously, then nothing would be hidden in the world. And in actual fact, nothing is hidden. If you can perceive, if you can tune yourself, then everything is a known, nothing is an unknown. It's just that we are consciously not capable of assessing that data, number one. And number two, our instrumentations are not subtle enough or not sensitive enough to be able to catch the data. Otherwise, nothing is hidden. Everything is available, right? You really cannot hide anything.
Morphogenetic fields. Rupert Sheldrake, in his book A New Science of Life, proposes that all systems are regulated not only by known energy and material factors, but also by invisible organizing fields. These fields are causative because they serve as blueprints for form and behavior. These fields have no energy in the normal sense of the word, but because their effect reaches across the time and space barriers normally applied to energy. That is, their effect is just as strong at a distance as it is at close range.
So now what does this imply? What we are reading about in the Power versus Force book that we are reading on Monday and Tuesday, over there, David Hawkins brings about the concept of attractor fields. So for anything to manifest, a field has to be generated first, and the manifestation of whatever needs to manifest happens in that. So this is exactly the same concept where Rupert Sheldrake talked about the morphogenic fields. So there is a field which precedes anything manifesting, right? Now in the BG3 process, we also see that if I draw a line, a BG3 attractor field is created before the line, which results in the line happening. So anything that is created, a field needs to get created before it actually manifests. And of course, this field is applicable universally. So you may be anywhere in the world, the field is there. That's it, right? So over here he says that the effect is just as strong at a distance as it is at close range. So you're transcending time and space when we are going into the morphogenic field concept.
Relativity theory stated that it is impossible for a particle to travel faster than the speed of light.
We've already done that.
According to this hypothesis, whenever one member of a species learns a new behavior, the causative field for the species is changed, however slightly. If the behavior is repeated for long enough, its morphic resonance affects the entire species.
So what does this imply? Right? If an behavior is repeated, it leaves its imprint on the morphogenic field and it affects anything that is coming after that related to that particular aspect of reality. Right? Now, they did an experiment where they had people do the London Times crossword or the New York Times crossword. Right? They did an experiment with it where they gave the crossword to a person before it was published. Now, let us say that that person took 20 minutes to do the crossword. Now, after the crossword was published and many people had solved it, they found that the time taken to do the crossword after it was published automatically reduced. The simple fact is because many people had completed the crossword, it became easier for anyone to solve the crossword after it had been completed by many people. So this is what he's saying here. If a behavior is repeated for long enough, its morphic resonance affects the entire species. So now what it means here is that if a habit is created by a particular species or they act in a particular way, it will affect everyone who is coming after that. So this is how traditions are created, how rituals are created. This is exactly how they are also created. So it follows because of the morphogenic field. Now the Foundation for Shamanic Studies is doing a lot of work with this, where they are going into tribes, etc., where the traditional processes of doing the rituals, etc., have got lost. So they are teaching the people of the tribe to go into altered states of consciousness, connect with their ancestors, connect with the morphogenic field, and download all the rituals, etc., so that they can recreate their heritage. Right? They're using the same process to recreate heritage so that the culture can be maintained, it can be continued. And that's a real big thing that the Foundation for Shamanic Studies is actually working on. So they call them living legends, etc., these shamans, and they are allowing them, they're teaching them how to do it.
Sheldrake called this invisible matrix a morphogenetic field, from morph, form, and genesis coming into being. The action of this field involves action at a distance in both space and time. Rather than form being determined by physical laws outside of time, it depends on morphic resonance across time. This means that morphic fields can propagate across space and time, and that past events could influence other events everywhere else.
So it says, rather than form being determined by physical laws outside of time, it depends on the morphic resonance across time. Right? So again, the morphic field goes beyond time and space. And if something has happened previously, it can affect a future event. And if something happens in the future, it can affect the past event. Okay, we've discussed this many times before, where you can actually go to a past event, rehash it, and it can affect the future. This is something that is talked in the terms in PMH Atwater's book, Future Memory. If I can have a past memory, why can't I have a future memory? Because everything is happening at the same time and it is recorded in the morphogenic field. In you could call it the Akashic records, you could call it the morphogenic field, you could call it the Hall of Records or whatever you may name it. But the basic idea is the same.
An example of this is shown by Lyle Watson in his book Life Tide, The Biology of Consciousness, in which he describes what is now popularly called the 100th monkey principle. Watson found that after a group of monkeys learned a new behavior, suddenly other monkeys on other islands with no possible normal means of communication learned that behavior too.
So it followed that the other monkeys were picking up on the morphogenic field that was being created or developed by this first set of monkeys, and they downloaded the data, right? So in the movie Matrix, you have seen, right, that they were on the top of the building, and there was a helicopter standing there, and they didn't know how to use the helicopter, so she called the operator for the program to be uploaded with which they could fly the helicopter. The program was downloaded into their system, and immediately they could fly the helicopter. So these downloads of data which take place, which Robert Monroe called the rote, right? The rote, resonant, organized thought energy, which when we are going into these expanded states, many times a rote will come and it will start to download in our system, and we'll know stuff that we previously didn't know, right? So we are consciously not aware. Many times you'll find that someone asks you a question and you blurt out something and you really didn't know the answer. Where did it come from? It came from the big guy, because the big guy has connected with the morphogenic field to download that data.
Dr. David Bohm in the journal Revision states that the same thing is true for quantum physics. He says the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen experiment showed that there would be non-local connections or subtle connections of distant particles. So there would be a wholeness about the system such that the formative field could not be attributed to that particular particle alone. It could only be attributed to the whole. Thus, something happening to distant particles can affect the formative fields of other particles. Bohm goes on to state that the notion of timeless laws that govern the universe doesn't seem to hold up because time itself is part of the necessity that developed.
Okay, so what does he mean? That everything affects everything else. So the statement that we keep making, that if a butterfly flutters its wings in Brazil, it will affect the entire universe. So every particle is affecting each other. Something is happening somewhere, it will affect somewhere else. So this is the other reason that when we are going into these expanded states, we constantly are telling you, Robert Monroe always said in the Gateway Voice, the first thing that we talk about is watching your thoughts. You are responsible for your thoughts, and your thoughts are responsible for creating whatever is manifesting. So we need to keep watching our thoughts, right? So like that, every particle or every action that is taken by anyone around the world affects everyone else. Now again, coming back to power versus force, what is said? That most of humanity is operating below 200, but there are some who are operating above 200, and those some really have a very big effect on the entire humanity. How is that possible? Because of this effect, that everything affects everything else. So something will be pulling you down or depleting you, and something will be lifting you up or creating you into a higher evolution process.
In the same article, Rupert Sheldrake concludes, so the creative process which gives rise to new thought, through which new wholes are realized, is similar in that sense to the creative reality which gives rise to new wholes in the evolutionary process. The creative process could be seen as a successive development of more complex and higher level wholes through previously separate things being connected together.
So what he's saying is that as more interconnectedness takes place, as more growth and development takes place, as more realization takes place, the evolutionary process creates more and more complex situations. Let's put it that way. So as today primitive man, and today you consider modern man, there's a lot of development which has taken place. There's a lot of capacities which have developed which were not there previously, right? So like that, development is constantly taking place. We are constantly learning and we are constantly growing. So the creative process and the evolutionary process is affected by this interconnectedness?
Multidimensional reality. Jack Safati, another physicist, suggests in psychoenergetic systems that the way superluminal connectedness can exist is through a higher plane of reality. He suggests that things are more connected or events more correlated on a plane of reality above ours, and that things in that plane are connected through an even higher plane. Thus, by reaching to a higher plane, we may be able to understand how instantaneous connectedness works.
So now every culture, every organization has its cosmology, right? If you see the Buddhist mandalas, they will have levels. If you look at shamanism, they have the upper world and lower world and the layers. If you see the Monroe process, you have the higher, you have the focus levels, right? If you see the Hindu culture, you have all the Indralok, Brahmalok, Vishnulok, and all that stuff, right? When you look at it from the Robert Monroe's ultimate journey, we'll read that book ultimately. He again talks about cosmologies. There's one reality, and then there's another reality, and then there's another reality, and everything exists in every reality. Now, if I'm looking at something from a higher level of consciousness, from a higher relative position, then my ability to perceive automatically gets enhanced. I can see the interconnectedness more than what someone who's operating at a lower consciousness. So the example that we keep using, if I see it from here, I can see so much. If I see it from here, I can see so much. If I see it from here, I can see so much. So as we raise our level of consciousness, our ability to perceive, our ability to know, our ability to develop automatically starts to get enhanced.
Conclusion. Physicists state that there are no basic building blocks of matter. Rather than the universe is an inseparable whole, a vast web of interacting, interweaving probabilities. Bohm's work shows that the manifest universe arises out of this whole. I suggest that since we are inseparable parts of that whole, we can enter into a holistic state of being, become the whole, and tap into the creative powers of the universe to instantaneously heal anyone, anywhere. Some healers can do this to a certain extent by merging and becoming one with God and the patient.
So what is he saying over here, right? So the universe is an inseparable whole, a vast web of interactive interweaving possibilities, right, or probabilities. So in life, right, the way that we view it, everything is a probability, and everything is interconnected to everything else. If something is happening somewhere else, it'll affect what is happening here. So the probabilities are constantly shifting, they're constantly adjusting, we are constantly adjusting, we are constantly setting our barometers, we are constantly adjusting to the environment, to our thoughts, to the people around us, because everything is interrelated and interconnected. Now, if we can shift our level of consciousness and move into a higher level, then we can create the healing. So when we go into oneness, right, we become aware of what is out of whack, what is out of balance, and we can affect balance in that particular system because we are connecting to a higher state of consciousness. This is something that we are seeing when we are using the reball also. We are going into a slightly higher state of consciousness called focus 10 and then sending the reball. And that's what makes the reball very effective healing mechanism. And we are seeing it regularly in the healing group where people, when they are posting, the effect can be actually observed and seen. For me, I'm having dental procedures going on. Those of you in the healing group know, right? So I just had an operation, literally. They tore my gum down and brought it down by 2-3 millimeters. But I'm still able to speak. I think it's only attributed to the reball, right? And what we are doing, others, I'm doing the humming, I'm going into F10 and 12 and sitting there. I've literally had to take no painkillers, which is amazing, right? So how does it work? When we are going into higher states of consciousness, things start improving, things start healing better, things start working better. And this is something that we've always observed with the reball also, which is at a very, I mean, it's a very low level where when we are talking about consciousness states, even in the Monroe process of 52, we're just operating at 10. So again, what is the state of consciousness that we are operating at, which will result in the healing?
Becoming a healer means to move towards this universal creative power, which we experience as love, by re-identifying self with and becoming universal, becoming one with God. One stepping stone to this wholeness is to let go of our limited self-definitions based on our Newtonian past of separated parts and to identify ourselves with being energy fields.
So again, when we are getting into the state of wholeness, when we are getting to the state of oneness, right, we can become more efficient. Our information, the downloads will become more. Our intuitive abilities as to, okay, whether this is the right thing for me to do on right now or not. What is the universe telling me? Our ability to perceive universal consciousness will start going up. This is what we read in left hand, Agora, the left hand of God, right? He was in tune with the universe. So if he said something, the universe used to manifest it, or he was constantly watching what the universe is telling him. So, like that, everything around us is constantly giving us information. If we can perceive it, then our lives can become much, much better. We can jack into the flow. And when we get into the flow, then synchronicity starts happening. Things will happen for you rather than you making them happen. Right. So we step out of our normal Newtonian concept of broken into parts, the separateness that we create around ourselves. We let go of the ego, the small guy, right? So that we can connect more perfectly with the big guy and really connect with the whole.
If we can integrate that reality into our lives in a practical and verifiable way, we can separate fantasy from a possible broader reality. Once we associate ourselves with energy fields, higher consciousness becomes associated with higher frequency and greater coherency.
So again, as we start connecting with a higher field of consciousness, our coherence, our balance, our connectedness, our equanimity, our centeredness at the lower field automatically starts to happen. And this is something that, again, all excursion workshop peer graduates, if they are connecting to that field of consciousness of F10 and F12, will start realizing that they're less irritable, they're more present, they're more efficient, they're more effective if they are operating at F10 in this normal physical 3D matter reality that we are normally living in. Why? Because they're living in this 3D reality, but operating at a higher state of consciousness. So things automatically start to fall in place.
Using Sarfati's model, we begin to see a world very much like that described later in this book, the world of the aura and the universal energy field. There we exist in more than one world. Our higher bodies, higher auric frequencies, are of a higher order and are more connected to others' higher bodies than our physical bodies.
Okay, so again, there are various layers of consciousness. And actually speaking, we all live in all the layers. It's just that we are not consciously aware of it. So why are we here? We are here only to expand our perspective, to expand our level of consciousness so that we can connect into these higher layers. We can grow, evolve our conscious awareness to those higher layers of consciousness.
As our awareness progresses into higher frequencies and higher bodies, we become more and more connected until we are eventually one with the universe. Using his concept, the meditative experience then can be defined as an experience of raising our consciousness to a higher frequency so that it can then experience the reality of our higher bodies a higher consciousness, and the higher worlds we exist in.
Right. So what does this imply? The higher we go, the more aware we become, the more efficient we become, the more evolved we become. And actually, we all have a long way to go, but one step at a time. We can already feel these experiences. Now, by the Lord's grace, we've been permitted to even conduct the Lifeline program and Exploration 27 in India online, right? Now that makes it very, very easy because many people can join the programs now. It becomes efficient, it becomes easier. We've lowered the price also. So what happens is that in Focus 20, in Exploration 27, we can actually experience Focus Level 34. Of course, it's a way in coming because we need the participants to graduate through the uh, through the gateway program, then the guidelines program, then the lifeline program, and then we get to exploration 27. But these higher states of consciousness can actually be experienced by us.
So let us look more now at the energy field phenomena to see what experimental science can tell us.
So I don't think the reviews are, sorry, I don't think the review is so important because we already discussed all this. Okay. HEF would stand for higher energy field. Okay, and what it says in the last survey, imagine yourself as a hologram. How does this unlimit you? Now, if you are a hologram, you're automatically connected to the whole. Everything gets connected. And there is this book, I forget the author's name, but The Holographic Universe, right? Where he actually shows that the entire universe is holographic in nature and everything is interrelated and interconnected. And this is exactly what is being spoken about through the concept of the morphogenic field, through the concept of shared realities, parallel universes. All this stuff is all dependent on this holographic universal concept.
Chapter 5: History of the scientific investigation into the human energy field. Although mystics have not spoken of energy fields or bioplasmic forms, their traditions over 5,000 years in all the parts of the globe are consistent with the observations scientists have recently begun to make.
So again, science was always restricted by the capacity of the instrumentation, whereas mystics were using their consciousness to go into these higher states of consciousness and downloading the data. So a lot of stuff that was being actually said by the mystics and it's written in the older books that are there is now being scientifically proven. And this is happening all the time, right? The meridian system, the chakra system, the organs, what the organs do, how do they work, what are the chemicals being secreted in the body, which herb will help which thing. These were all downloads by the mystics, right? And they were able to perceive what is the effect of something on our system because they were operating at a higher state of consciousness.
Spiritual tradition. Adepts of all religions speak of experiencing or seeing light around people's heads. Through such religious practices as meditation and prayer, they reach states of expanded consciousness which open their latent, high sense perception abilities.
So what does this mean? All our Devi Devtas, even Christ, had a halo around their heads. Now, how did that halo come around? Because a normal person cannot perceive that halo. So someone definitely must have perceived that halo to put them into the picture, right? So they were operating at a higher state of consciousness to be able to perceive that. Now, of course, we've got so many technologies to be able to actually see the halos. So in awareness, we've got the GDV, we've got the Progen Aura camera, we've got biofield imaging, we've got the we've got two or three other technologies. We've got actually 5 technologies with which we can actually see the aura. What are these energy fields around us? Right. So now science is simply catching up with what these seers and these people operating at higher consciousness states could actually perceive for themselves.
Ancient Indian spiritual tradition, over 5,000 years old, speaks of a universal energy called prana. This universal energy is seen as the basic constituent and source of all life. Prana, the breath of life, moves through all forms and gave them life. Yogis practice manipulating this energy through breathing techniques, meditation, and physical exercises to maintain altered states of consciousness and youth far beyond their normal span. The Chinese in the third millennium BC posited the existence of a vital energy which they called qi. All matter, animate and inanimate, is composed of this pervaded with this universal energy. This qi contains two polar forces, the yin and the yang. When the yin and yang are balanced, the living system exhibits physical health. When they are unbalanced, a diseased state results. Overly powerful yang results in excessive organic activity. Predominant yin makes the insufficient functioning. Either imbalance results in physical illness. The ancient art of acupuncture focuses on balancing the yin and the yang.
So now all cultures have had mystics who have gone into these altered states and downloaded this data. So in India, it was called prana. In China, it was called the chi. And now we are coming to the other lists also.
Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical theosophy, which began around 538 BC, refers to these same energies as the astral light. Christian religious paintings portray Jesus and other spiritual figures surrounded by fields of light. In the Old Testament, there are numerous references to light around people and lights appearing, but over the centuries, these phenomena lost their original meaning. For example, Michelangelo's statue of Moses shows Karnaim as two horns on his head rather than two beams of light the word originally referred to. In Hebrew, this word can mean either horn or light.
So again, there's a lot of misinterpretation of the words, of the messages also, right? Because the person who actually had that experience, it is practically not possible to really explain the experience to a person who has really not experienced the experience, right? So until you experience the experience, you really can't get what the experience is all about. And when people want to put these experiences into words, many times there is no word to describe, or they lack in the ability to actually give a proper description. And this happens in all situations. We've seen that when people go into a Lifeline, into X27, you can't explain your experiences to people because the vocabulary is not there, because it's such a deep feel. It's a deep state of consciousness that for someone who has not experienced it, becomes very difficult for us to explain it to them. So that's why, the miscommunication between the lights and the horns and all these things, misrepresentation and communication always happens.
John White, in his book Future Science, lists 97 different cultures that refer to the auric phenomena with 97 different names. Many esoteric teachings, the ancient Hindu Vedic texts, the Theosophists, the Rosicrucians, the Native American medicine people, the Tibetan and Indian Buddhists, the Japanese Zen Buddhists, Madame Blavatsky, and Rudolf Steiner, to mention a few, describe the human energy field in detail. Recently, many with modern scientific training have been able to add observations on a concrete physical level.
So when we look at all these names mentioned here, Rudolf, Madame Basque used to do a lot of these seances and all that. So if you Google her name in on Google, you'll find these seances and all that start to come out in that. And this Rudolf Steiner, he did a lot of work with agriculture, how to get the universal force and the universal consciousness into agriculture. He did a lot of work with it, how to create micronutrients and all that. We are attempting to get a person who has worked with this process a lot to give us a talk at one of our 9:15 sessions. Working on it, I hope we can get that gentleman. He's done a lot of work, Mr. Banerjee.
Scientific tradition, 500 BC through 19th century. Throughout history, the idea of a universal energy pervading all nature has minds. Vital energy, perceived as a luminous body, was first recorded in the Western literature by the Pythagoreans. They held that its light could produce a variety of, including the cure of illness.
So 1 second. So Shivangla was not audible in some cases. So the Pythagoras was the first person in Western literature to actually say that there's a light around everything and manipulation of the light can result in healing, right? So basically manipulating the auric field would result in physical healing.
The scholars Borek and Liebold in the early 20th century saw that humans have an energy that can cause an interaction between individuals at a distance. They reported that one person can have a healthful or unhealthful effect on another simply by his presence.
So what is happening? When you're getting into the proximity of someone, their field will start to affect you. Now, this is again something that we are talking about power versus force also, power versus force also. That your company, the consciousness of the people who are around you will affect you, right? Now, this also works at a distance. If someone is thinking of you, जो अपने many times जब burping करने लग जाते हैं बोलते हैं कि this falana person is thinking of you and all that. These things actually happen. So the idea here again it becomes that we need to become very resilient within ourselves. Our field needs to be resilient. Otherwise, we'll keep getting bombarded and being manipulated by the thoughts of others, right? This is how all healing works and how all black magic also works. Basically, they're using the same principles.
The scholar Paracelsus in the Middle Ages called this energy Iliaster and said that Iliaster is composed of both a vital force and a vital matter. The mathematician Helmont in the 1800s visualized a universal fluid that pervades all nature and is not a corporeal or condensable matter, but a pure vital spirit that penetrates all bodies. Leibniz, the mathematician, wrote that the essential elements of the containing their own wellspring of motion.
So again, sorry. Shivangla, please mute. Okay, so what does this all mean? Like when Madame Baskerville was actually doing the seances, something called ectoplasma used to appear in the room also. The form of that person used to appear in ectoplasmatic solutions. So when we are looking at three states of matter, we are looking at solid, liquid, and gaseous, right? When you go up, you have plasma, then you have ether, and you have plasma, and then you have ether. These are the other two states of matter which are also present. So here they are basically talking about plasma and ether, which goes beyond solid, liquid, and gas. Yes, Renuji.
Bhaiya, before this, when you had mentioned about that you need to make yourself resilient, so that means it's something like "Mujhe kehte hain, nazar lag gayi."
Absolutely. That is what I
Then
was
how
talking
does
about.
one make one's resilient?
You become
Like
more resilient, so it doesn't affect you. It doesn't, your
like children and
system.
all.
What?
I said children and all.
Yeah, so
They
that's
can.
why children को ज़्यादा नजर लगता है, because their fields are open and they don't have practices which actually protect them.
So that
So
means things like our
it's like a
rebirth.
smaller, like a bigger if you bring a bigger magnet near a smaller magnet, the field of the smaller magnet is going to get affected, right?
Right.
So if there is a bigger field which can suck into your field, right? So in shamanism, we have this principle, that we are constantly bombarded by critters. They call it critters, right? Who are constantly attaching themselves to us and sucking energy from us. So the idea is to remove them. Now, if you are resilient, the critter will not be able to survive in your body. For example, when your immunity system is good, the infection cannot affect you.
So a person could be more resilient is as long as he feels positive. If he's feeling down, that means
If
his
you're feeling
resilience
down,
would
then
be
you're
high.
weak, right? Your resilience drops when you're getting sucked, when you're
So
getting depleted.
that way,
When you
so
are
as long as a
operating,
person keeps their thing high, that
no, no,
would
no, no.
help them to keep
You
their resilience.
operate at a more resilient state of consciousness. Now, don't mix up resilience with high and low.
Okay.
I can be feeling a little low, but I can still be resilient. Having said that, a person who's in depression, when you see the levels of consciousness in power versus force, is operating at a lower state of consciousness. Now, someone who's resilient will not be below 200, they'll be above 200 in any case. You understand? So, when you're looking at resilience, we can look at it from the heart math perspective, where your heart rate variance is good. When you look at it from the mind mirror perspective, you are developing patterns which are of a higher state of consciousness, right? When you look at it from Monroe Institute perspectives, you are operating at a higher focus level. When you look at it from David Hawkins' perspective, you're working at a higher level of consciousness, above 200, above 500, right? So the more resilient you become, the higher your state of consciousness, the better off you will be. Even if you get affected, your bounce back will be quicker. Effect to sabhi ko hoga, but your bounce back, your system's ability to get well, to get rid of the stuff which is creating a problem, will automatically get enhanced. So someone who's healthy, they get less sick, technically speaking, because the system is more resilient. Okay.
Thank you, Bhaiya.
Other properties of the universal energy phenomena were observed in the 1800s by Helmont and Mesmer, who originated mesmerism, which became hypnotism. They reported that animate and inanimate objects could be charged with this fluid and that material bodies could exert influence on each other at a distance. This suggested that a field in some ways analogous to an electromagnetic field might exist.
So now we know that an electromagnetic field does exist, right? And the point is that everything impregnates, and some things impregnate more. This is something that we talk about in biogeometry also, where if you make a symbol and you put a sticker somewhere, if it is not done properly and it is not cleared, or it is not self-clearing, then it can get impregnated and the use of it can diminish. This is something that we find with rings also. People wear rings. What happens is that after some time, the effectiveness of the rings start to drop. Simply, this is something that we talk about in the Vastu and Energy Field workshop, where the ring starts getting impregnated. So you have to clear the ring. Like that, everything around us gets charged. So that's why you have some objects which are harmfully charged. Many times when a highly spiritual person blesses something and gives it to you, and you keep it with you, that charge remains in that and it affects you in a uplifting manner. This is the reason also why in most cultures you'll find they sprinkle the water right on you after the prayer is done. They sprinkle the water. What is that? The water is charged, and when the charged water hits you, it charges your field also. So what he's saying here is that items and animate and inanimate objects can be infused with this energy, with this vital, what does he call it here? Yeah, this vital fluid. It has a sense perception. You can actually feel it. Many times when I go to people's houses, I find that there's like kitchen on the floor. There's so much of negativity and negative residue in the space that it becomes like kitchen. When you walk on that floor, your legs start to pain, right? So that needs to be cleared. It can impregnate stuff. So this is what he's talking about here.
Count Wilhelm von Reichenbach spent 30 years during the mid-1800s experimenting with the field, which he called the odic force. He found that it exhibited many properties that were similar to the electromagnetic field that James Clerk Maxwell had described early in the 19th century. He also odic force. He determined that the poles of a magnet exhibit not only magnetic polarity, but also a unique polarity associated with this odic field. Other objects, such as crystals, also exhibit this unique polarity without themselves being magnetic. Poles of the odic force field exhibit the subjective properties of being hot, red, and unpleasant, or blue, cold, and pleasant to the observations of sensitive individuals. Furthermore, he determined that opposite poles do not attract as in electromagnetism. He found that with the odic force, like poles attract, or like attracts like. This is a very important auric phenomenon, as we will see later.
So like attracts like, right? So now we are getting into resonance over here. So what is resonating at the same force field will attract each other. In electromagnetic principles, when we bring our two magnets north and north, they'll repel. North and south, they'll attract. But when we are talking in resonance, when we are talking about these fields, that time whatever you are resonating with will come into you. So whatever you are thinking of will come into you. Whatever you are paying attention to will come into you. So that's why it becomes very important to notice what are we thinking, what are we paying attention to, because of this odic force, you could say.
Von Reichenbach studied the relationship between the electromagnetic emissions from the sun and associated odic field concentrations. He found that the greatest concentration of this energy lay within the red and blue-violet ranges of the solar spectrum. Von Reichenbach stated that opposite charges produce subjective feelings of warmth and cold in varying degrees of power, that he was able to relate to this periodic table through a series of blind tests. All electropositive elements gave the subject feelings of warmth and produced unpleasant sensations. All electronegative elements fell on the cool, agreeable side, with the degree of intensity of sensation paralleling their position in the periodic table. These sensations, varying from warm to cool, corresponded with the spectral colors varying from red to indigo.
So red will be hot and violet will be cool. And each of these colors has a frequency. As mentioned before, with using the pendulums developed by the biogeometry faculties, we can actually assess where the line is starting from and where it is ending, right? So technically speaking, if a person is sensitive, they would be able to perceive the color emitted from where the line starts and the where the light ends. And if you're sensitive enough to find the heat thing, then where the line is starting will be cool and where the line is ending will be hot. So he's talking about the same principle over here.
Von Reichenbach found that the odic field could be conducted was very slow, approximately 4 meters per second or 13 feet per second, and that the velocity seemed to depend on the mass density of the material rather than on the electrical conductivity of the material. Further, objects could be charged with this energy in a way similar to charging by the use of an electrical field. Other experiments demonstrated that part of this field could be focused like light through a lens, while another part would flow around the lens, similar to the manner in which a candle flame flows around objects placed in its path. This deflected portion of the odic field would also react like a candle flame when subjected to air currents, suggesting the composition is similar to a gaseous fluid. These experiments show the auric field has properties that suggest it to be both particulate in nature like fluid and also energetic like light waves.
So again, when we are going into an environment, right, we can actually feel this flow of energy, whether the energy is flowing correctly in the environment or not. You walk into a room and you can actually analyze how the energy is flowing into the room. So there is a concept called energy keys, where you can actually assess how the energy flows into the environment and how it partitions, how it covers the whole room. Now, if the energy key of the energy flowing into an environment is not balanced, it causes imbalances in the system. So what he's saying over here is that this energy acts like a particle and it acts like a wave at the same time. So it's very important to feel this energy where it is, and it can affect everything else. So if the energy field of a space is good, it will influence everything that is there. If a place, energy field of a place is depleted, it will affect everything that is there. Now, suppose that's the reason why it was told that don't use antiques in your house, because you do not know what was the field in which that antique was kept, because that antique will be absorbing the energy and the radiation of whatever is happening in that particular space. We had gone to for a wedding to this fort, and there was a spot on, we were walking up and there was a spot, right, and over there I really felt a jarring, kind of a shaky kind of an energy over there. And later on it turned out that that was a place where they used to kill the people. So all these spaces where people are tortured, people are beaten up, and people are beheaded and all that, will automatically retain that energy. Also, spaces where prayer is going on, a lot of puja is going on, will again impregnate that energy. That's the reason why you go to temples, etc., where a lot of prayers are going on. Of course, nowadays people don't do the prayers properly, which can create that impregnation. Although, as we've discussed previously, the shape of a particular space will also automatically self-clear, etc. So those facts are also there. But basically what he's talking about here is the flow of energy in an environment.
Von Reichenbach found that the force in the human body produced a polarity similar to that present in crystals along their major axis. Based on this experimental evidence, he described the left side of the body as a negative pole and the right side as a positive pole. This is a concept similar to ancient Chinese yin and yang principles mentioned earlier.
So again, we find that when we are checking with the Lecker antenna, the axis splits up if it is not in equanimity and equilibrium, right? And when it splits up, it causes issues that are there. So like that, the field, the human body field is also generating this energy field. Now, whether it's generating it or the physical body is created because of that field, now that's a question mark. But yes, the energy body definitely predates and it precedes the physical body, which is what we are going to be seeing in this book going forward also. Okay, I think we can stop here today.